All right, well, good morning. Again, welcome to SALT. And we're just going to let Gayla do her thing and just talk to people because, that's what Gayla does. And it's even more fun to call her out because she appreciates the kind of things. Yeah, so I'm Nathan. You know me, so I'm the community pastor here at SALT. And as Heather said, we are continuing our series on the book of Judges, which is a book in the Old Testament of the Bible that is interesting, to say the least. This is a book with a lot of war and battles and action and cool stories and weird stories and intrigue and betrayal and all sorts of other things, all wrapped up in this 21 chapter book. And it's difficult to say that the book of Judges is a story because it's really a collection of events and stories over a period of 300, maybe 350 years. And since it's covering a lot of ground in those 21 chapters, it's kind of, I'll use the word interesting again. It's interesting to see kind of what makes the cut in the book of Judges. Um, there's some things we have a record of that you don't really kind of understand. Why did this make its way into the Bible? We'll see if we are brave enough or if we have time in our 6-week series to cover chapter 19. I'm not even going to tell you what's in this chapter. If you really want to know what's in chapter 19, please go read it yourself. I always encourage you to go read anything and everything in the Bible yourself. But chapter 19 is it's a weird one. And it's one of those things where, like, again, you kind of wonder, how in the heck did this one make the cut in the Bible? What is this trying to tell us? So, who knows? But anyway, this morning we're going to be covering the story of Gideon, like Heather said. So the kids are covering Gideon over there. We're also talking about Gideon. And it's kind of funny that when we were kind of figuring out the preaching schedule for Judges, we kind of laid out, I'm going to preach week 2, and then Heather's going to do 1 and 3. But then a couple weeks ago, she asked me, "Can we switch?" I'm like, "Sure, why?" She's like, "I really want to preach on Deborah." I was like, "Oh, well, cool. I actually want to preach on Gideon." So this actually worked out really well. So this story is a great one. The story of Gideon, it's a great one, and I'm excited to kind of get into it with you this morning. Because have you ever, given somebody a book recommendation or a movie recommendation that you're really excited about, and you're just hoping that when they read it or when they watch it, they're also going to think it's just great. And because you love it, you're pretty sure they're going to love it too. That's why you recommended it. But you're also, you're not sure if they're going to love it because, even if you know somebody pretty well, everybody's tastes are a little bit different. And so you just never know. So, you kind of ask them, like, did you read it or did you watch it? You're kind of hoping that they also think it's amazing. And depending on what the story is, maybe you can't be friends anymore if they didn't think that it's amazing. It's that important to you. I mean, I remember when Eric and I were dating, she had never seen Star Wars. And she's like, nope. And that was only my favorite, not just movie, but collection of movies growing up. I mean, I literally wore out our VHS tapes watching and rewatching these. Pause, fast forward, rewind. I mean, just the tape and the VHS got worn out, and it was just fuzzy. It just eventually stopped working. And these VHS tapes we only had because my mom recorded them off TV when it was like one of the Sunday night movies on the network. When they showed, like, it's the Sunday night movie featuring Star Wars. Like, oh my gosh, can we record it? And the problem with if you record something off TV when a network's showing it, there's these pesky things called commercials because these networks are really greedy and they need to make money. So, our recording though, did our recording have commercials? It did not, because my mom sat there with the remote, like, okay, pause for the commercial. And the commercial come back, record. And I gotta say, if that isn't a sign of love for your kids, I don't know what is. So my recording of Star Wars had no commercials. There was this short 10-second scene that I didn't know existed because my mom forgot to hit record like when it came back from commercial. So when I bought the movies later on, I was like, hey, that's kind of cool. I didn't know that scene existed. And it was just a short little snippet. It didn't have anything to do with the plot, but I'm like, hey, that's cool. I've never seen that before because in my world of Star Wars, it didn't exist. But anyway, so I made it a requirement for Erica to watch Star Wars. And now I didn't have any disillusions that she was going to love it as much as me, and I also didn't have any clue if she was even going to like it. But at a minimum, I needed her to tolerate it because if we were going to be together, I needed her to be okay with, me occasionally watching these movies, having it on the background. It's kind of my go-to movie when I'm not feeling well. I just kind of lie on the couch and just put it on, and I'd drifted out of sleep because I've seen these movies 1,000 times. So when I wake up from my, sick sleep, I know exactly where we were because I've seen it so many times. So it's comfort viewing. And so when we're watching it, I know that different scenes, I was kind of looking over at her and I was like, this is great, right? Yeah, you like this. And, after being with her for a couple of decades, I now know the look that she gave me, but she kind of gave me the look like, can I just watch now? And make my own opinion about what's going on here? And yeah, so I know that look well now, but anyway, you're kind of wondering maybe if she did love Star Wars, you can ask her if she loved Star Wars, but I can tell you she at least passed the test of tolerating it. So, we can be together. So she at least passed that test. If anything beyond tolerating it, you'll have to ask her yourself, like where her love of Star Wars goes on the spectrum. But what does this have to do with Gideon? Well, I wouldn't say that Gideon, has a place in my heart as stories like, Star Wars does. I wish it did. I wish I could say that about any, story from the Bible, that it has a place in my heart and life like Star Wars does. But honestly, I can't. That's just, I haven't read any book in the Bible, 1,000 times like I've seen Star Wars. So sorry, God. But with that, though, I do love the story of Gideon. And because of that, I'm going to read a good chunk of 3 long-ish chapters this morning. I'll do my best to not like pause in the middle of it, be like, yeah, this is pretty good, right? What we're reading right now. But we'll do it. So with that, let's start reading. We're going to be spending most of our time in chapters 6 and 7, but we'll get into a little bit of chapter 8 where it kind of wraps up. So let's get going, shall we? We're going to read the first 10 verses of chapter 6. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." So this is the background of the time and situation for Gideon, who we haven't even met yet, but soon we're gonna meet him when I read the next little bit. But basically, God, he's ticked off at his people again. He's punishing them again, and he's letting other nations invade them and make their lives really just kind of a living hell. And when the people call out to God asking for help, he's like, I told you not to worship other gods, but did you listen? No. And so this is what happens. All right, we're going to keep reading. We're going to be introduced to Gideon. So I'm going to read 11 through 18. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring an offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, I will wait until you return. So we meet this young man named Gideon, or we don't really know how old he is, but at least in my mind, for whatever reason, when I'm reading this part of the story, he's a young man. And, is the fact that he's young, is it factual? I mean, honestly, no, but I'm going to go with it. You can think of him when you're kind of listening to the story as any age you want. The only thing we kind of know about him in terms of like how old he is and everything is at the end of the story, we know that he ruled as a judge for 40 years and he died at an old age. So, maybe he's middle-aged at this point, but it honestly doesn't matter. He's at least young enough that God's like, yep, I'm going to use you. But I mean, Moses was like 80 or something when he started using Moses. So any age, God's going to use you. But I do love the reaction that Gideon has of meeting an angel of the Lord. It's both polite. He goes, pardon me, my Lord, twice. But it's then also a little bit incredulous and kind of disbelieving of what he's being told. I mean, he questions that the angel, like, whether he really has the right guy. Since he's from the tribe of Manasseh, which isn't always thought of as, the strongest or most influential of the 12 tribes of Israel. And he claims to be from a weak clan within Manasseh, and he says, I'm the least of my family. So he's saying, I'm from Manasseh, my clan is weak, and I'm the least of all of that. So he's basically saying, I am just not the right person to be doing anything big. And, we don't know if any of that's true, and we don't really know what Gideon is basing that on. But let's just kind of continue this morning, assuming that Gideon has at least his assessment of who he is and who his clan is and kind of his status. He's got at least somewhat right. So, but with that, kind of God looking at him like, you might be all of that, but yep, you are my guy. That's what God's saying. He's like, yep, you're my guy. And God can and will use anyone. He is not limited by our limitations, real or perceived. But even though God says he's going to use Gideon, Gideon still asks for a sign that it is really God talking to him. I mean, I don't know what my reaction would be if suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared to me. I mean, I might be sarcastic. I probably would be sarcastic knowing me. I'd be like, sure, you're an angel of the Lord. Yeah, that's who you are. But Gideon takes the route of asking for a sign of proof. I mean, bold move, Gideon. And one that we're going to see again, kind of asking for a sign. Apparently that's kind of Gideon's thing. So Gideon, he brings an angel some meat and some bread and a pot with broth. And let's read what happens. So this is going to be the sign that he gets. So we're going to read verses 20 through 23. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of his staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die. So now Gideon has the proof that he needs to know that the angel of the Lord is actually, who he said he was, that he actually is an angel of the Lord. And this is important because what he's going to be asked to do next, it's going to kind of tick people off. So, what he's going to do, he kind of needed to know that God is going to be with him, because what God's going to ask him to do is going to really kind of mess with other people. And so I think it's safe to say that now that Gideon knows that the Lord is with him, he's much more open to what God wants him to do. And it's amazing what we can do when we are confident that God is there with us. God is always there with us, but for whatever reason, when we are confident that in this moment, in this place, it's just easier to kind of go along with what God is telling us to do. So let's read 25 through 32. What does God ask him to do? That same night, the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height. Using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. In the morning, when the people of the town got up, there was Baal's altar, demolished, with the Asherah pole beside it, cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. They asked each other, who did this? When they carefully investigated, they were told Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The people of the town demanded of Joash, "Bring out your son. He must die because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, "Are you going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." So because Gideon broke down Baal's altar, they gave him the name of Jerubbaal that day, saying, "Let Baal contend with him." And we think Jerubbaal means Baal or contends with Baal. We don't really know, but it's kind of an interesting nickname that Gideon has. So like he'll be referred to as Jerubbaal sometimes throughout the rest of the text. So it's interesting. So anyway, so Gideon, he builds an altar to God, which normally wouldn't be, that, scandalous. However, he not only breaks down the altar to Baal, the false god, and the Asherah pole next to it, and the Asherah poles, they were used in sacrifices and ceremonies to honor the goddess Asherah. But he then uses the wood from the Asherah pole to build the altar of God. And yes, he did this at night to kind of, make it a little bit more conspicuous, but it's not like the people weren't going to find out what he did. And so when the people wake up the next morning and they see what happened, they were ticked. They wanted Gideon put to death immediately. Have any of you ever, you go home, you go out, and after you get home, the person watching your house, whether it's a kid or a friend or someone else, they just kind of messed things up, and you don't really know what they did per se. You don't know why they did it, but they definitely messed things up and they moved things around, and you're just like, why? Why would you move my coffee table for no reason? Like, what are you doing? This is that and then some. Gideon didn't just move their coffee table. He broke down the altars that they were using to worship false gods. And so because of that, they demanded to know who had torn down their altar, and they were determined to kill him for it. And surprisingly in this story, it was Gideon's father, Joash. He's the one who defends him, even though the text tells us that it was his altar that Gideon tore down. So Gideon tears down his father's altar, but yet his father comes to his defense. So I don't really know what that says about, parent-child relationship, but it's just kind of an interesting thing in there. So Gideon, he's saved for now, but all the people there, they kind of decided, okay, we are going to gather our forces and we are going to attack. So the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the other eastern peoples, they gathered together and they camped out near where Gideon was. So in response, Gideon, he kind of sends out a message to his clanmates of Manasseh, plus some of the other tribes of Israel, and then they answer the call and they come and they're prepared for battle. And so people show up, but Gideon, he still isn't really sure about how this is going to go. And can you blame him? So this nation, the Midianites, they'd been terrorizing the people for over 7 years, and now they wanted to go to war, not just kind of mess with their crops and their livelihood, but now they want to go to war. So it's not like he can just ask them to leave. He can just go up to them politely and say, "Well, can you just leave us alone?" That's not how this is going to go down. They've been kind of pushing against these people for a while and hadn't had any success in fighting them off. So I got to say that this mess that he now finds them in is just kind of an exponentially worse situation than what they've been dealing with so far. So Gideon, he's a little trepidatious, and wouldn't you be though, kind of with everything that's going on here? So what does Gideon do? Well, Gideon, it's kind of his go-to move. He asks for a sign. He asks for a sign from God, like, okay, how are we going to do this? Or how can I know that we're going to have success against these people? So let's read 36 through 38, still in chapter 6. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece, and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowlful of water. So problem solved. Gideon asks for a sign. God delivers, saying that, yep, I'm going to save Israel through you. And so you asked for a sign. I did exactly what you needed me to, so done and done, right? Well, no, let's keep reading. So then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me." So this is going to be good. Like, don't be angry with me, but here's what I'm going to ask for. Let me make just one more request. Allow me to allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew. And that night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. So, sure, God, you can make something super wet with dew, but who knows? Maybe it was just really dewy that morning, just on my fleece. So, let's try it the other way around. Perhaps the next time we can just do the opposite. Every time I read this passage, I just kind of laugh. And I laugh not just because the request is ridiculous, even though it kind of is. I laugh because when I really think about it, I would probably do the exact same thing if I was in Gideon's shoes. I don't know if I would have gone through the, wet fleece, dry ground, dry fleece, wet ground kind of thing that he did, but I definitely would have, looked for a reason, any reason to not have to do this. I mean, that's just human nature. God's asking you to do something huge, and you're just kind of like, I don't really want to do that. And so I think that's what Gideon's doing. Yes, he wants to make sure God's with him, but I think he's also kind of looking for a way out. And God's like, no, here, I'm with you, man. I'm with you completely through all of this. And we don't know of any prior experiences that Gideon might have had, as a military leader who was, going to be all of a sudden ready to take on the Midianites. But it's likely minimal, if any, that he had any military experience before this. But God said he was going to use him and he was going to do this to save his people. But Gideon's kind of saying, really, God? Really? I mean, I don't know about you, but I personally, I have not been asked by God to do anything like that in my life. I mean, I've done some really cool things in my life, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's this one time when I was 13 years old, I was the hula hoop champion of the galaxy at my church camp in Florida. I successfully did 8 hula hoops at one time for like 10 seconds, and they crowned me the hula hoop champion of the world at camp. Now, I don't know that was necessarily like God inspired, but you also don't have any proof that it wasn't. So I think that that's just kind of something cool that God's doing through me. So anyway, for Gideon, I'm going to guess that for him and for most normal and rational people, he was probably pretty scared to do this huge thing. And even with God's assurance, that doesn't make it any less of a huge thing that he's being asked to do. I mean, he's likely thinking that it's going to take a miracle for this to happen. So he's asking for a couple of small miracles to, maybe prime the miracle pump, for God. Like, hey, let's get some of these miracles going. So when we go for the big miracle, you're already ready. So let's do some little ones so that when I need the big one, you're going to be ready for that. It's just interesting. So God's like, yep, do these miracles, but just wait. God's going to do some really big God things. He's going to make this whole story a whole lot more interesting. I mean, if you think Gideon was a little bit unsure about the situation right now with the army that he had kind of amassed and God performing miracles saying, yep, I'm with you. Let's read the beginning of the next chapter, and we're going to get into how sure of the situation you think Gideon's going to be. So we're going to read verses 1 through the beginning of verse 8. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all of his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel will boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 20,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. So you had 30,000 people. 2/3 of them, like, yep, I'm afraid. So they left. But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you while you're there. If I say, 'This one shall go with you,' he shall go. But if I say, 'This one shall not go with you,' he shall not go." So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink." 300 of them drank with cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home." So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. So for any of you who've seen the movie 300, which I'm told is completely and definitely historically accurate, this is kind of the original 300. These are the 300 fighting men who would actually claim victory over and over again, not just, inspire others to join the fight like the movie 300, which again is definitely historically accurate, like they did in the movie. So why just 300? Well, I'm going to read part of verse 2 again. You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me, that my own strength has saved me. So God knows that if Gideon takes his large army of 30,000 men and marches against the Midianites and wins, then the Israelites, they won't give credit to God, but they're going to give credit to themselves. And it's amazing how well God knows us sometimes, isn't it? I mean, he knows our strengths, our weaknesses, our limitations, and our abilities even better than we do, better than we know ourselves. And so in this case, he knew that there needed to be an extreme disparity between the Israelites' number and the Midianites' number for him to actually get the credit of what happened. So because of that, what does God tell Gideon to do? Take that army size, which is already vastly outnumbered by the Midianites, by the way, but decrease it by a couple orders of magnitude. Go from 30,000 all the way down to 3,000? No, 300. Take 300 men with you to take on the vast army of your enemy that has been tormenting your people for years, killing your livestock, ruining your crops, and making it so you just really can't even live. So yes, those people that have been tormenting you, you're going to overrun with 300 men. So just 1% of the army that had showed up, that's what you're going to take them on with. So what does Gideon do when he whittles his forces down to 300? It's his move, right? He asks for a sign. Actually, no, this time, again, God knows us better than we know ourselves. Gideon doesn't ask him for a sign. God almost like preemptively gives him a sign. He tells him to sneak down into the Midianite camp and hear what they're saying about him. So he says, go down and hear what they're saying about you and your army. So we're going to read verses 9 through 15. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites and the Amalekites and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. When Gideon heard the dream and his interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, get up, the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands. So instead of a sign, God gives Gideon ironclad proof that his enemy is afraid of him. I mean, maybe they don't know that they only have 300 people left. It doesn't really matter. But they are afraid of Gideon and the army that's coming. So they're having dreams about being beaten in battle. And God uses this to give confidence to Gideon and his men that they're going to be victorious now. And a good thing too. I mean, I don't know how much faith I would need to have in order to take my strong and to take on a strong and well-manned army, and then take it on with my army that used to be decent, but it's now, again, been reduced by 99% to 300. And then all of them go home and you're going to take it on and you're going to still have the courage to go into battle. And to do that, I don't think I'd have the courage to do that, let alone have confidence that we have any chance of victory. Like maybe it's like, yeah, we'll go on and we'll take on a suicide mission, but no, we're going to go and we're going to have victory on this. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know God can and has done amazing things, and he's done amazing things over the years that, but knowing that doesn't automatically give me faith that he is going to continue to do it today. And I'm sure that's kind of what Gideon and his men were thinking at the time. I mean, sure, God led Israel out of Egypt after performing, the 10 plagues against Pharaoh, and then he parted the Red Sea, and then there were all sorts of other amazing miracles that only God could do that their ancestors had witnessed over years. But a lot of times those feel like just stories. And it's tough sometimes to think of the stories in the Bible as historical events that really happened, and then to have the faith that God can and will still move mountains for us today. I mean, it's tough to think that God can and will use you to do amazing things, because the stories of God using people to do these amazing things, that's just kind of in the past, and those are just stories, right? He couldn't possibly use you. Well, never think that you can't be used by God, and never think that being used by God is going to look anything like what you think it'll look like. It's actually probably the opposite of how God's going to use you. I mean, God, he uses people in amazing ways even today. And for Gideon, I have to imagine that he, again, a man self-described as being the least in his family, never imagined that he would lead a group of people, whether it be this large army that he started out with or a much smaller fighting force, to go against the Midianites and actually claim victory. But that is exactly what happened. So there's still like a chapter and a half left of this story that I encourage you, again, I always encourage you to read what we're covering on your own. And I know I say that all the time, but this time actually do it. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. So read Judges chapter 6 through 8 in their entirety, and then read all the details of Gideon's story, and then kind of the stories of the battles that he has. And there's people that are doubting him and questioning him all the time here. So here's a quick summary. So here's kind of a summary of some of the stuff I'm going to yada yada. So Gideon's force of 300, they attack that night. The Midianites, they're kind of thrown into confusion. They start attacking themselves, attacking each other. So they flee, and then Gideon's force of 300, they didn't defeat them all, so they had to pursue them. So they had this battle. They were victorious in terms of like they reduced the Midianite force, but then they had to go after them again. So Gideon's force, 300, they have to pursue them. The enemy's force is whittled down from 120,000 to 15,000 over the next, half chapter to a chapter. And so you think, so Midianite's force is 120,000. Gideon had 30,000. It goes down to 300. So his 300 men have whittled that force from 120,000 all the way down to 15,000. They keep on pursuing them, and ultimately Gideon and his little ragtag group of 300, they are victorious. And again, there's a lot that I yada yada'd in those little six points there. And Gideon, he definitely had his doubters along the way. I mean, people like Israelites, people that he's supposed to be helping them, kind of free them from the Midianite, kind of rule, or not even rule, but just the infestation of them and making so they couldn't actually live. He's trying to free them from these people. And other people that they came across, they wouldn't even give Gideon and his men bread to give them sustenance and some energy to keep on going, because they're like, well, you haven't captured the leaders of the enemy, so how do we know that you're going to be successful? But in the end, Gideon, he does claim victory, and ultimately God does get the credit, or at least most of it. And so after this, the Israelites, they wanted Gideon to rule over them. They're like, this is amazing what you did, so we want you to now rule over us. But here's what Gideon's response is. We're going to skip ahead to chapter 8 and read verses 22 through 23. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." So Gideon knew where his place was compared to the other people of Israel, and especially compared to God. So the Israelites, they might have given God the credit in this moment, but they also kind of sort of really gave Gideon the credit. And Gideon, he did his best to direct them to the one that they really should be giving the credit to, and the one who actually provided the victory. But after all this, I'm sure everything turned out really good, right? Of course not. They basically, I could read some more verses, but so Gideon ends up making this like token, we called them an ephod, of like gold that they get from their plunder, just kind of as a symbol of what God had done. And so what do the people do when they see this token of what Gideon put together? Well, they start worshiping that. This is what saved us. So they start worshiping that. And then as soon as Gideon dies 40 years later, the text says that the Israelites immediately started worshiping the Baals again. So this amazing thing happens, and then they, give God a little bit of credit, but mostly Gideon, and then they worship this gold trinket it's big, that Gideon makes just as a sign of all the plunder that they had, and so that's kind of where they end up. So when I read something like that, I think it's easy to read it and be like, come on, how can you keep on messing up like this again and again? But here's the thing. Faith is real, and faith is important, but faith is also fragile. And if you're not continuously and constantly working on it to keep it strong, to keep it centered on God, to nurture it and to grow it, it's going to struggle to actually stay and remain where you want it and where you need it to be. Now, I don't know the full details of why Israel turned away from God as soon as Gideon died, and neither do you, neither do any of the scholars who read this. But what I do know is that it's easy to let your faith wander and to focus on things in different seasons of your life. That doesn't make it okay, but it's an easy thing to do, because your faith with God is just like any other relationship. If you don't give it the time and the energy that it needs, then it's going to be a struggle, just like any other relationship, to keep it strong and keep it healthy. So keep working on your faith. Keep looking to Jesus and keep trying to do your best to love God and to love people as He commanded us. And then even when your faith ebbs and flows, know that God never does. He never ebbs, He never flows, and His love for you never does either. He will continue to pursue you, and He will continue to love you, and all you have to do is let Him. And who knows? Maybe God will do amazing things through you. Whether you have amazing faith, a lack of faith, just trust Him a little bit and see what God will do in you. Let's pray.